This week on Eye on the Clouds.
My name's Gaillard. I live in the Clarence Valley. I got interested in this whole situation when Arrow Shell PetroChina drilled an exploratory drill 3 kilometres upstream from my farm, where I breed horses with my wife, and we suddenly on a floodplain, and we suddenly started investigating this whole thing. We looked further into it, and for about 17 months with a number of people, we've been exploring this whole thing that is coal seam and unconventional gas in the northern rivers and elsewhere. So I'm the MC for tonight. You'll see a bit of me. And this is, it's a book called Eradicating Ecocide. It's a new term, but it's one, if we reflect a little, then we know that ecocide is something that is happening in our community, in our environment, in all levels, and governments aren't keeping up with it. And the promo says, exposing the corporate and political practices destroying the planet and proposing laws needed to eradicate ecocide. And we have a message from the author of this book in London for us. We're standing with you, as many others are around the world, on this great journey to end ecocides like the fracking taking place in Australia. We are one team, one people, standing for what's right for us and Earth. Together we have the courage, the vision and the spirit to make this a thing of the past and create a future. Love and hope from Polly Higgins and Eradicating Ecocide team in London.
The presentation after the break, I'll explain some of the local geology, which explains the local interest in the Clarence Moreton Basin. So what is unconventional gas? It is methane. It's the same as natural gas. It's mostly methane. There's some other hydrocarbons that coexist with it, so it needs processing and cleaning. It's extracted from coal seams, from shale beds or tight sandstone, and it differs from conventional gas in terms of how it's extracted and the impacts of that extraction. And one of the impacts include the byproducts that are produced from its processing and extraction. And the other major difference is the short-term nature of it. Conventional gas fields can last for 40, 50 years, no problems. Around here, we're talking for the unconventional gas, individual wellheads are typically exhausted by 15 years. So the inconvenience, the industrialisation of a landscape is only for a short-term gain. I mentioned that it differs from conventional gas because of the way it's extracted, and one of the methods that's used for extraction of unconventional gas is fracking. And fracking involves pumping water, chemicals and sand under pressure, under great pressure, into the ground to cause fissures or cracks in the rock to allow for the gas to flow. There's a moratorium in place in New South Wales until April. We're hoping it'll get extended. So I'll just quickly go through 5 issues. The first is the potential water issues, potential water impacts. This is an idealised picture of what happens in coal seam gas mining. The gas in coal seams is actually held there by water. So part of the process is pumping out water, and that releases the gas. It's then separated and you end up with produced water going to a treatment plant or a holding pond or somewhere else, we hope it's not too much, and gas to a processing plant to clean it up. The issues are things like the cumulative impacts, like you can drill this once, twice, there's a risk involved in drilling because you might actually puncture aquifers. Every time you do that, the chances of something going wrong increases. The chemicals used in fracking, if they contaminate the groundwater and freshwater, they haven't actually been tested for human health, and there are substantial volumes. I prefer this diagram because it's a truer representation of actually what is happening. And you've got the sources of potential contamination happening here at the holding ponds, leaking into groundwater. You've got the drilling process. Every time it punctures an aquifer, there's a chance that could be depleted or contaminated. And the fracking process itself, these cracks can be 200 or 300 or 400 metres long, and sometimes they can get into groundwater, and you can actually drain an aquifer through that process. And we're talking about depletion of hundreds of metres of depth in some situations. That was a recorded incident in Wyoming. And even if you've still got water, you can get contamination with gas, and that's the classic, oh dear, our water tap has suddenly exploded in flames, which is the last thing you really expect when you turn on the tap. So potential water impacts, how do you manage contaminated water? With these holding ponds, as I said, and there's large evaporative ponds. Now they've been banned for production wells, but they're still permitted in New South Wales for exploration stages. There's also treatment, such as reverse osmosis, and Tony Burke is keen on getting companies to re-inject water into the ground. So local example, this is Metgasco facility just west of Casino. They've got holding ponds and evaporative pond at the old council quarry at Peora. And yes, there's some issues with that. And we're talking about the holding ponds and other ponds. They're only protected from the ground by builder's plastic, it rips. Then you get leakage. Second issue is land use impacts. Now, Drew has really explained just how horrible the change to our landscapes will be. It's basically what we're being asked to accommodate within our rural lands is incompatible with farming. But we're talking, I went to town on this slide. Every time I was thinking, oh, I've got to put that in and stuff. Now, this is a picture of a production gas field near Chinchilla. There's a lot of surface infrastructure there. Lots of bare soil. You end up with erosion whenever you've got the bare soil. Each of these has probably got a generator driving the pump. That's noise in your rural landscape. We're talking about the mass conversion of rural landscapes into industrial landscapes, fragmentation of habitat, I'm a greenie, I don't like seeing forests which are being cut up because that has biodiversity impacts. Fracking is actually associated with increased seismic activity in a number of places overseas, and that's why it's actually been banned in several jurisdictions. And I just look at that picture and say, well, what happens in 15 years when the gas is depleted? Who's going to put it back to where it was? And it's, as I said, this is production gas field. This is pilot well exploration happening in New South Wales within a state forest at the moment. It's already happening here. They're not paying royalties or anything like that. They're just putting this in as part of an exploration licence. Third issue that I wanted to raise was carbon emissions. Gas is sold as a low emissions fuel. It isn't when you take into a life cycle analysis. And then if you start adding in others, like the reverse osmosis for the water treatment or re-injection of water into the ground, suddenly your energy levels are increasing dramatically. And as I said, the coal seam gas, it's mostly methane, but it's got some other stuff in there, you know, benzene, toluene, other hydrocarbons, which when they're burnt actually produce carcinogens. The volatile organic compounds, they're not a good thing you want to have in your air. So the industry's claiming it's green, it isn't a green fuel. I have a table here, and unfortunately due to time I won't be able to go through it in detail, but it basically does bring it back to there's 3 forms of unconventional gas we're dealing with. 2 of them always need fracking. 1 of them might need fracking. 1 of them produces lots and lots of water. Shale gas and tight, you know, they may not produce that much water. But in all of them, we've got risks to groundwater, we've got land use changes, and we've got air and noise and emissions problems. Another issue I wanted to raise, and this is purely New South Wales. Sorry, and I meant to change this to weak regulation rather than poor. I was brain dead today when I was trying to think of proper words: inadequate, weak, non-existent. Royalties. There are low returns to the state at the moment from this industry, not just because it's in its infancy, but because the New South Wales government, successive New South Wales governments, has made a conscious decision to subsidise each and every gas well for the first 10 years of its operation. Now, in Queensland, they pay 10% royalties on commercial returns. That's what I understand. In New South Wales, for the first 5 years of commercial production from a well, they pay Zippo. And then for the next 5 years, it increases gradually until 10%. So that meant that in the 2009-10 financial year, the industry only paid $462,000 to the state government. That isn't even enough to pay for the bureaucrats who are meant to be regulating the industry. And I know councils have been asking, we want a proportion of the royalties raised in our areas. Well, 25% of zero is still zero. Sorry, Richie. Another part of the regulations which I find is very poor and very weak is the lack of public input into decision making in the exploratory phases. Now, exploration can take a lot, it can produce a lot of the impacts that would be expected in full-blown production, and yet the public don't get a chance to see the EISs, don't get a chance to make any comment on the proposals, don't even get notified if it's happening next door to them. And and then the last issue I have is what's happening to the gas. And most of it's ending up overseas. If it was domestic use, I probably wouldn't complain as much. You know, it'd be powering us in our local areas. But they're talking about large gas fields which are going to be sent which are going to produce gas, which is sent to China. And that's done through liquefied natural gas. That's energy intensive, so you're adding to your greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going. Most of the issues, most of the gas is going to be exported from Gladstone in this area, but there's even proposals to do an offshore facility in Ballina. And that's the end of my first presentation.
Now Janet's going to give us an overview of the local situation, who's involved. I might preface this by saying that the current New South Wales government has passed an aquifer protection policy and a strategic land mapping policy, all right? Our local member in Lismore, Mr Thomas George, actually considered it an oversight that the Northern Rivers was not considered till 2015, till this is done. So here's Janet.
Thanks, Ian. And in relation to that point, that's everyone should have this handout. It was on your chairs when you came in. So the Northern Rivers and the Mid-North Coast regions are considered low priorities for the strategic land use plans, which the New South Wales government is undertaking. So that's what it says here. Just above the lock the gate message, which says don't negotiate, don't sign anything, seek legal advice and lock the gate. It was great to hear on the news this morning that Janelle Saffin has managed to get the federal government to start a process of independent, expert, scientific advice happening in the Northern Rivers, and I'd like to acknowledge that, and I'd like to acknowledge Peter Ellam and his work, who, he was quite eager to take on the anti-CSG message in the by-election, and I still reckon he got a lot of my votes for doing so, but good on you, Peter. This is going to be a quick overview of the local scene. There are 3 companies involved at the moment in the Clarence Valley local government area in terms of exploration licences. They're Metgasco, there's Arrow Energy, and there's Red Sky Energy. So this presentation will talk about what their plans are in the area. First, here's a map of New South Wales. It shows all the current petroleum exploration licences that have been issued in New South Wales. And those little blue dots, they're where there has been drilling, either for coal or for gas. Now, as Sue pointed out, gas is just considered a gaseous form of petroleum, basically, under the Act. Now, this map comes from a government website. The URL for it's on the screen. It's also at the bottom of this, on the back page. It's called MinView, and I find it very helpful. So if we zoom into the Northern Rivers, you can see there's not actually much which isn't covered by petroleum exploration licences at the moment. So this area maps pretty much the New South Wales part of what's known as the Clarence Moreton Basin. So why are people looking at the Clarence Moreton Basin? And that's basically due to the geology of the area. And I have to apologise, I am not a geologist and I never actually studied it at uni. However, these green lines, green and greys, and that very, very pale pink, that's basically coal and sandstone and coal and sandstone. It's like a Danish pastry, layer upon layer sort of thing. The black is the Ipswich coal measure. The pale grey, the grey beneath that is the Nimboida coal measure. And this very, very pale grey is the Walloon coal measure. So the Clarence Moreton Basin is important as a source of coal and also coal seam gas. And we've got the history of coal mining in Nimboida. So that's the bottom cross profile, which is from Nimboida to Sandon. And yeah, sorry, I should have tried to invert it so that the bottom one, which is most interest to us, could be at the top. Sorry about that. So going back to the Northern Rivers, this is a map that came from Red Sky Energy. So it colour codes the companies that are involved. So the pale pink is Arrow Energy. The green is Metgasco, and because Red Sky's got red in its name, it decided to give itself the colour red. So if you have a look at the Clarence Valley local government area, that's shown in the red outline there, you can see that more than half of the local government area is covered by current petroleum exploration licences, or PELs. So Red Sky, together with Clarence Moreton Resources, has these ones here, that one. Metgasco's got this big slab, which goes into almost Nimboida, around Grafton, includes Pillar Valley. And we've got a little bit of Arrow Energy up here, around Ewangar and South Tabulum. This is what the mining companies want the Clarence Valley local government area to look at. This new pale pink colour is the applications that are currently before the government for either exploration licences or a special prospecting authority. So most controversially, we've got the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, which has basically put in an application to cover all the lands south from here to Port Macquarie and below. So it's a huge area. So we're likely to get some new players in the area. That's Macquarie Energy and also a company called Summerland Way Energy. But I'll concentrate on the ones that have actually got existing licences. Now, as I said, we've got a history of coal mining and, you know, coal seam gas comes from coals. So I thought I'd just show you the context of what coal interest there is in the Clarence Valley local government area at the moment. There's 2 exploration licences. Both of them have expired, though a renewal has been, application has been put in to renew them. And that's basically where the old Nimboida coal mine was. The coal's not an issue in the Clarence Valley. You know, there might be an argument to say that coal seam gas mining was good as a precursor to coal mining because it removes the dangerous methane that can cause explosions in underground coal mines, or also it can increases the fugitive emissions during coal mining. But that's not the case here, definitely not. So I'll just go through the companies. Arrow is a company. It actually, if you look at the MinView site, it tells you that BNG Propriety Limited owns those exploration licences. Arrow took over BNG in 2002. Arrow itself is owned in a 50-50 joint partnership by PetroChina and Shell. So it's completely 100% foreign owned. It used to be one of Australia's top 100 companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX. It was removed from there in 2010. So, and the byproduct from that is that we have very little idea of what they're doing because they don't actually have to make shareholder announcements. So everything they're doing, we find out by accident. Clarence Moreton Resources is another private company. It's actually a family company owned by people who actually also own East Coast Power. Now, East Coast Power is interested in building the Narrabri Power Station at the moment, and they actually haven't got the resources or the time or the people to do work here. So they've entered what's known as a farm-in agreement with Red Sky Energy, which, lucky for us, is an ASX-listed company, so we know what they're doing. And as part of this farm-in agreement, Red Sky Energy will incrementally increase the amount of interest it has in each of these petroleum exploration licences. Basically, they do the work and they get paid with having an interest in the PEL. So at the moment, they're working hard on getting that 30%. You know, now they're working to do 70%. So they only have to do a lot of work in 2 of those exploration licences held by Clarence Moreton Resources before they actually get 100% interest in all those PELs in the Clarence Moreton. So this is what Red Sky has been working on at the moment. 2 areas. One's a very small PEL southeast of Casino. The other one's this larger PEL that extends into the Clarence Valley, but their action to date has been in and around just north of Whipparee at the Talma well. They've been beating up how successful it has been. Every time I see an announcement, of all the companies, I think they must produce more announcements than anyone else. And they're planning a pilot production well on the Talma site. They said they could have it in and operating by Christmas. Well, that passed, and now they're saying they'll get the permissions next month. But they've made several announcements saying, oh yes, it's coming, it's coming. They even did a positive spin on when their first review of environmental factors was rejected by the state government, they said, oh, well, that's good, we're just going back for further information, but they're interested, they haven't rejected it yet. But that's actually happening in the Richmond Valley local government area. So the other big company that we've got in the Clarence Valley LGA is Metgasco. Metgasco are a fully owned, are a company that's listed on the ASX. So you as individuals can just go to a share broker and buy some shares, and you can be a shareholder of them. So again, they are making announcements. And if you go on their website, this is their homepage in about February. Their latest news, these are basically ASX announcements that they've been making. One of the ones that they made, 12th of January, first gas sale agreement. They've got a binding 10-year sale agreement for gas to Richmond Dairies and Casino. This is done while they still have an exploration licence, not a production lease. So it'd be interesting to, and their production lease, they've made an application for it, but it still hasn't been approved. So it'd be interesting to see how binding that agreement is. So these are the areas of interest for Metgasco. You've got basically the area around Casino, and then they've got quite a large PEL in the Clarence Valley. It is Peter Henderson, who's the managing director of Metgasco, who's made the statement that the domestic market is completely insufficient to make their operations viable. They need to tap into a larger market, southeast Queensland, and export. And that's basically what they're driving for. So one of their big components at the moment is the Lions Way pipeline, or they'll be looking at alternative routes for that pipeline and possibly an offshore facility. Metgasco, well, they've done seismic testing in the Coaldale and Clarence and Copmanhurst areas. They've drilled wells around Whipparee, Banyaba, and also near Borden's Bridge. They have stated to the ASX that they plan to drill 2 more wells this year. They already have approvals in place to do drilling in Dilkoon and Coaldale, but they didn't actually reveal what those what properties they're going to be going on to. They put it on their wish list, as it were. They've started work doing environmental assessments around the Pillar Valley area as well. So they're certainly interested in this area, despite what you might read in the Clarence Valley Review. Now, Metgasco is unique of these companies because it is the only one that is restricted in its interests just to the Clarence Moreton area, to the Northern Rivers. They don't have any mining interests in Western New South Wales, in the Hunter, or in southern Queensland. So they're actually quite vulnerable to what happens within the Northern Rivers. But they're actually claiming to be one of the big players. So Clarence Moreton Basin is extremely prospective in terms of gas. So if you look at what they claim to be their proven, their probable, and also their possible gas reserves, they're up there as one of the big players. But I like to point out that their proven and probable is much, much less. So we've got an alliance against coal seam gas. We should probably mention this earlier. The details are on the bottom of the back page of the flyer, and we'd like to get people involved in the campaign so we can actually be an effective hindrance to the development and expansion of the industry. We'll talk about that later.
Thanks, Janet.